Hello everyone, this is Deepika,
And this is Harshit.
and we are both practicing therapists based in India, and we are endlessly fascinated by the strange, brilliant, often chaotic world of psychoanalysis, especially when it sneaks into our films, books, and everyday culture.
If you love deep dives into literature, cinema, history, politics, and everything bubbling in the unconscious, then hit subscribe because this channel is going to be your new rabbit hole.
And for our very first video, we are doing a deep dive into
There's a man lying outside a mansion gate, dying. A woman runs towards him, but before she can reach him, the door shuts. That image of distance, desire, and too late love has lived in Indian memory for almost a century. But here's the real question. Was Devdas a great tragic lover destroyed by society, or was he the original man-child who destroyed himself?
he makes grand promises and speaks like a poet. Yet again and again, he cannot act when it matters. He feels deeply, but rarely acts. He loves, but he cannot hold or protect what he loves. He drinks not to live, but just to breathe. We pity him and we also feel frustrated with him. Even today, we cry for him, mock him, and sometimes see ourselves in him. Which feeling is truer? Why does this man keep pulling us back a century after he was written? Why does a character written in colonial Bengal still hold such a tight grasp over our colloquialisms?
Name a love story that India keeps remaking again and again for a whole century. It is Devdas. Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay's 1917 novella has been adapted for the screen about 20 times, which makes it one of the most filmed non-epic stories in Indian cinema. The lineage reads like a quick tour of Indian film history. P.C. Barua filmed it 3 times in the 1930s in Bengali, Hindi and Assamese and helped set the grammar of the tale for the talkies era. Bimal Roy's 1955 version turned restrained realism into a classic and brought major honors, becoming the benchmark many scholars and viewers return to. Half a century later, Sanjay Leela Bhansali's 2002 version took the same triangle of Devdas, Paro and Chandramukhi and staged it as grand opera, screened it in the official selection at Cannes, and landed on Time magazine critic Richard Collis' year-end millennium lists.
The story did not stay in one language or even one country. The Telugu and Tamil bilingual Devadasu in 1953 made A. Nageshwara Rao and Savitri defining figures in the South. Pakistan had an Urdu version in 1965. Bangladesh produced new Devdas films in 1982 and again in 2013. This cross-border life shows that the triangle travels wherever class, love and duty collide. In the 21st century, Anurag Kashyap's Devdi moved the tale to millennial Delhi and gave the women a sharper sense of choice, while a later political thriller like Das Dev kept the conversation going. Retelling Devdas is as much about talking back to the myth as it's about repeating it. There are simple reasons why the story keeps being remade. The triangle is portable, the conflict between family pride and romantic choice is clear and quick to grasp, and filmmakers can dress it for any era or region. The roles are star-making. Devdas, Paro and Chandramukhi invite each generation's actors to leave their mark. Above all, melodrama has a long life. Song, spectacle and heightened emotion turn private pain into a shared experience so viewers across languages can enter the feeling together. Devdas has also moved beyond the cinema hall. The name itself is now shorthand in Indian pop talk for the lovelorn, self-pitying romantic, a figure audiences instantly recognize. Critics and academics keep returning to it because the films open so many doors at once. Class and caste in colonial Bengal, the making of a screen hero from weakness and decay, and the ways performance, music, and staging teach us to feel for this flawed man.
There is a paradox at the center. Devdas is reckless and self-absorbed. He is weak and often robbed of agency. He acts too late and then suffers for it. Yet, the film presents him in ways that draw sympathy rather than hate. Performance, music, and staging turn a difficult man into someone we pity and sometimes love. Critics have tried to name that pull. Gayatri Chatterjee calls Devdas an archetype of the self-destructive urban hero. Thomas Crickmore notes that we feel disappointed with his passivity, yet we do not dislike him. The famous line spoken by Dilip Kumar in 1955 still explains the pose of despair.
कौन कमबख्त है जो बर्दाश्त करने के लिए पीता है? मैं तो पीता हूं कि बस सांस ले सकूं.
The film also opens into older poetic traditions of longing and oblivion in wine. Even in a couplet by Ghalib, feels at home beside his figure who drinks not for pleasure but to lose himself for a while. The same paradox shapes the women. Paro and Chandramukhi are not weak shadows. They are strong and loving in very different ways. And the audience sees qualities to admire in each. They fall for a man with clear flaws and stay loyal in ways that make sense for their time. That is why the final moments hurt so much. Devdas dies at Paro's gate without seeing her. Paro runs to the door and the house closes on her again. The grief feels communal, as if the audience has been asked to carry the last few steps with them.
When we talk about Devdas, we are not talking about a single film or even a single era. We are talking about a shared cultural habit that stretches across languages, borders, formats, and decades. It's a book that has become 100 little rituals. It is a set of characters that became an adjective. It is a story that keeps teaching new filmmakers how to stage love, respectability, and ruin for their own time. With that scale in mind, here is how we will proceed. First, the cultural legacy that made Devdas a habit of memory. Then why Bimal Roy's 1955 version is our anchor. Then the tale in one breath. And finally, the deeper question that frames this essay. Was Devdas a tragic lover or the original Manchild? If we had to pick one film that shows the whole life of the story in a single frame, it is Bimal Roy's Devdas from 1955. It stays closest to Sarat Chandra's spirit, and it does something few others try. It lingers on that tender stretch of childhood, so we feel how the bond is made before it breaks. That care is why many critics still call this the most faithful version. Roy stands exactly where we want to stand for this video. He joins social realism with musical melodrama. Feeling and form move together. There is also a living thread to the earlier era. Roy was the cinematographer on P.C. Barua's 1935 film, so continuity across time is literally baked into the making of this version.
The performances are definitive. Dilip Kumar's haunted Devdas is often named among the great acting turns in Indian cinema. Sridhar Sen and Vijayantimala are quietly precise. The film was honoured in its time as well, with the Filmfare honours for Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress, along with a National Award citation. All of this makes the 1955 film the right anchor for us. It lets us talk about faithfulness and change, star image and social critique, craft and cultural memory, without leaving the world of one clear and accessible work.
Set in early 20th century Bengal, Bimal Roy's Devdas opens with Devdas and Paro as childhood playmates. He's often mischievous and she tries to steady him. Their days feel gently idyllic until his father decides he must be sent to Kolkata for discipline and reminder of his education.
The separation breaks both their hearts. Years later, Paro hopes to marry him, but Devdas' mother rejects the proposal on status grounds. Paro risks her reputation, slips into his house at night, and asks for a place at his feet. Devdas wavers and says his family is against it.
He does try to persuade them but fails. He flees to Kolkata and posts a letter asking Paro to forget him, adding that he does not think he loves her. He then panics at what he has done and returns, only to find her marriage fixed with an older, wealthier man. He says he will fight for their relationship, but she does not trust him and says that the match is settled.
Feeling insulted, Devdas makes a scar on Paro's face, but they also immediately reconcile, and Devdas makes peace with Paro's marriage with someone else. Paro's husband, an older gentleman, tells her that he should never have married her given their age difference, and only asks her to take care of his house and estates. His children are as old as Paro. Initially reluctant, they slowly accept Paro as part of the family.
Back in Kolkata, Devdas starts drinking. Chuni Babu takes him to a kota where he meets the courtesan Chandramukhi. He pays her but refuses her company. This intrigues her and a cautious friendship grows. His drinking worsens and she often nurses him. When his father dies, he meets Paro again at his home, and at this moment he promises her that he will come to see her at least once before his own death.
Unable to forget Paro, and with his independence on alcohol increasing, Devdas is discovered on the streets of Kolkata drunk out of his senses by Chandramukhi, who nurses him back to stability, and he gives up alcohol for a time. On medical advice to rest, he leaves the city and sets out by train with his servant Dharamdas.
During the journey, he relapses after running into Chuni Babu, grows feverish, coughs blood, and realizes he's dying. Determined to keep his promise, he leaves Dharmadas at a junction and diverts towards Paro's town. He reaches a house at night and dies at the gate. When she eventually rushes to see him, she is stopped by her husband's children and servants, as it would ruin their family's reputation.
Well, we psychotherapists love to start from one's childhood, call it an occupational hazard. On the surface, Devdas seems to have had it all: a doting mother, affluence, and plenty of time for mischief. Where might have things gone wrong? It is our hypothesis that both his mother and his father left him vulnerable to different kinds of developmental arrests. In the beginning, we see Devdas's mother protest against his father's decision to send him to Kolkata. Would it be a stretch to say that then she is the typical Indian mother devoted to her son, but it is also the same mother who, without even blinking, rejects her son's wish to marry Paro? How could she have been so indifferent to what her son wished for?
Our argument here is that it is not uncommon for an indulgent style of parenting to be accompanied with implicit demands. These demands are often not asked for directly, but the interpersonal pressure of an endlessly doting mother on the son's psyche is often quite profound. It is a mother that can look straight at the son's eyes and say, "I've never disappointed you. I never wanted to disappoint you." Now, it's no surprise that this is far from ideal. Part of growing up involves facing one's limits, having one's aggressive impulses challenged and contained. This requires a caregiver that is sensitive to the child's struggles and yet is willing to openly disappoint the child. The lack of pretense in openly disappointing the child is also how the child is able to accept limits. This would require a caregiver that is quite openly able to say, "I will disappoint you. I am willing to disappoint you." And she would then move on to help the child bear with this disappointment. For the doting mother, perhaps this is hard. because she fears the son will hate her for this. And this hatred is difficult to bear. This is perhaps the case with Devdas and his mother. We see Devdas, even in his early adolescence, not understanding the consequences of his actions. His mischief borders on recklessness and a lack of understanding of the suffering others might go through as a consequence of his actions.
Omnipotence is a word that easily comes to mind thinking about all of this. A sense of omnipotence is a universal childhood experience. In infancy, a child is hungry and he is immediately fed, so the child thinks his wish makes him get whatever he wishes for. As the child grows up, he slowly understands that it is not his wish that makes things happen, but that someone understands his needs and attempts to meet them. This only gets worse as the child grows. Limits get set, and then there are the inevitable frustrations of misattunement. All of this is an enormous narcissistic injury for the child. Narcissistic injury here refers to a perceived or actual threat to an individual's self-esteem or pride, which can trigger extreme emotional distress. Ideally, this omnipotence is gradually deflated and is not experienced as a crushing defeat or humiliation. Phase-appropriate disappointments and frustrations gradually pave the way for realistic capacities and abilities the child can then take pride in. We want to make a case that this never really happened with Devdas. It seems as though his mother, unable to bear the hatred that might come from Devdas for the setting of limits, decided to be indulgent all through. This also gives a growing child a seriously wrong idea that his self is so fragile that he can never bear any disappointments, that his mother protects him because his self is indeed so fragile. This underlying sense of fragility and inability for tolerating frustrations, difficulties with understanding consequences are all a result of maternal indulgence perhaps. Then what do you guys think?
We would also like to add that there is a hypocrisy in this maternal indulgence. It is as if the mother is saying, "Look how much I suffer because of you. So when the time comes, I would ask the same of you." This is also what happens when Devdas' mother rejects Paro's alliance. All the indulgence is so that at a later point, the demands of a classist and a casteist household can be placed without any guilt. It is as if all the indulgence were a storing up of a moral credit so as to create a psychological debt. The mother can now claim, "I have never disappointed you, and you can now never disappoint me." Now perhaps Devdas' mother is more than all of this, and I am making a caricature of her. Even so, these are attempts at understanding developmental touch points in the life of Devdas. The Oedipus complex is a simple idea about growing up, and it is often badly presented. It does not mean that a child literally wants a sexual relationship with a parent. Freud used it to describe how a young child learns that love has limits, that there are other people with their own claims, and that you cannot be the only one who matters. It is a story about moving from an exclusive bond to a shared world. In early childhood, a child usually feels a strong pull toward the main caregiver and can feel jealous of the other adult. The child wants attention, comfort, and special status. This is normal. The name comes from a Greek myth, but in psychology, it is just a short way of talking about a triangle of relationship. The key task is to learn that the caregiver has a life beyond the child and that love must be shared and timed, not demanded without limit. When this goes well, the child accepts that they cannot have the caregiver all to themselves. They learn to manage mixed feelings of love and rivalry. They begin to identify with the other adult or with the adult position in general. They take in the family's rules and form a conscience. Out of this, the child gains a steadier sense of self, a clearer sense of how to belong with others, and the capacity to respect boundaries. Later, this shows up as being able to choose partners freely, tolerate frustration, and live with both desire and limits.
If this work is blocked, the person may carry the old triangle into adult life. They may fear authority rather than internalize it. They may struggle to choose and keep a partner. They may be drawn to people who are unavailable, or they may split love into pure and impure figures, seeking care from one person and desire from another. Shame, jealousy, and self-punishment can take the place of choice. None of this means someone is doomed. It simply means the early conflict was not settled in a good enough way and may need attention later. Modern psychoanalysis, however, does not treat the Oedipus complex as a rigid rule about mothers and fathers. It applies to many family forms and to any stable caregiving environment. The point is not biology, but the experience of a third person who limits exclusivity and introduces the child to a wider social world. Culture and circumstance shape how this unfolds, and people can work through unfinished parts later in relationships or in therapy. In plain terms, the Oedipus complex is a map of how we move from being the center of one person's world to becoming a person who can love, accept limits, and live with others. It is not a crude sexual claim. It is a way to understand how desire, rivalry, rules, and identification comes together to build a personality that can love and work in the real world. To understand how this plays out in a story like Devdas, we can now take the idea of Oedipus complex and see what happens when it is not resolved. The film gives us a striking example of a man who never completes his developmental task. His relationships with his parents, with Paro, and with Chandramukhi can all be read as repetitions of that early triangular struggle.
You can read Devdas as a man who never completes the Oedipal task. He begins with a very familiar triangle: a doting mother, a harsh father, and a boy whose love, fear, and rivalry are not worked through into a stable adult position. What follows is not a tidy resolution, but a lifelong repetition. Desire remains tied to the mother's orbit. The father's law hardens into a persecuting voice, and women later appear as split substitutes for the mother rather than as partners he can choose and keep. It is understandable that a child raised between indulgence and harsh command would grow into an adult who hesitates, clings, and then collapses. From the start, the film builds the Oedipus scene in clear strokes. Devdas' father is not good at patiently helping a child accept limitations on his behavior. Instead of endless indulgence, he takes the route of crushing humiliation and punishment. We imagine this was perhaps even harder on Devdas. Symbolically, one might say he might have felt castrated in front of a punitive father. The father, one might argue, also wanted Devdas to move out of his maternal orbit and experience the world. But he did this by sending him away as opposed to being with him and guiding him along the way. In the movie, we see the father beat and shame the boy, then bark an order that no one should open the door and that the child should be denied food. Nobody dare open this door, and no food for him either, he says. The mother rushes to soothe and plead. That pairing gives the boy two incompatible lessons: love as indulgence and law as brute force. A well-resolved Oedipal passage would end with the boy identifying with the father's position in a symbolic sense. He would accept limits, take up agency, and move his love outward. Devdas does not get there. He submits to the father's command when it crushes him, defies it in secret when it is absent, but never internalizes it as a principle he can inhabit. The paternal function becomes an external threat rather than an inner ground. Upon closer look, this looks less like willful weakness and more like the after effects of a confusing moral education.
Paro enters as the childhood companion who carries much of the mother's emotional place. Paro stands beside the strangle from childhood and gradually becomes a mother substitute for him. They grow up next door, moving through each other's courtyards as if they shared one household. When Devdas runs away from school, Paro anticipates his needs and says she will take food to him and coax him to come home by evening. Paro manages Devdas' impulses in small domestic ways. He orders her to fetch water. She refuses because she knows he will bolt if she turns her back. She threatens to tell his father about his secret tobacco habit. Their quarrel and quick repair follow a familiar system, a familiar pattern. He lashes out, she cries, he apologizes and soothes with a gift or an outing, such as the garden scene with the baby bird and the lullaby-like song. These are maternal functions in miniature: feeding, protecting, scolding, forgiving. Over time, Paro becomes the one who absorbs his acting out and restores the tie. For Devdas, care begins to mean Paro, and being cared for begins to feel more natural than choosing and acting. This dependence grows in the space left by inconsistent adult authority, which invites compassion for how early deficits set the pattern. One can only imagine what the rest of Devdas' adolescence and early adulthood was like. We are not shown any of this in the movie. I would guess that he perhaps withdrew into himself, drawing strength from his memories with Paro. As they grow, the pattern deepens. Notice the language and posture around her night visit to his room, risking her reputation, where she asks for a place at his feet and asks, "Give me a little space here at your feet, my God." The scene is drenched in intimacy and dependency rather than adult partnership. He cannot make a clear choice that would separate him from the mother's home and confront the father's law. Instead, he writes a denial in the refusal letter he sends the next day after fleeing his hometown, saying it never really crossed his mind that he loved her. What might explain this? This is classic Oedipal evasion. He refuses the act that would make him a man in his own right. He clings to sonship and lets the house decide. Perhaps some of it is also that early ambivalence of receiving love from a person younger than himself. But in the risk that Paro took, there is a sense of how much she means him, and this makes him recoil. His reckoning of her adult sexuality makes him recoil. One can argue that he is quite unprepared for it. Sudhir Kakkar writes that in psychosexual terms, to identify with one's mother means to sacrifice one's masculinity to her in order to escape sexual excitation and the threat it poses to the boy's fragile ego. It helps to see this not only as a failure but as the move of someone who never learned how to oppose authority without losing love. Now, I'm extremely empathetic towards the ambivalence this creates for Devdas. I think what both Paro and Devdas needed was some time to just spend with each other without the pressures of marriage. That might have given Devdas the time to prepare himself for a relationship. But with the social pressures around them, this was impossible. He quickly moves back to Calcutta and writes Paro a letter distancing himself from her, but wishing her well. Once it is sent though, it is not that Devdas realizes he was in love with Paro, but rather worries that he might have wounded her pride. he rushes back to meet her, except that her marriage is now fixed. Perhaps now it dawns on Devdas that he did indeed love her.
The mark he cuts on Paro's face is the clearest sign of Oedipal anxiety turned into action. We see him reach towards her and leave a small cut on her forehead and then saying, "Let me scar your face then. I have left a mark to remind you." When the boy fears loss of the loved mother and castration by the father, one defense is to control the woman's body symbolically. The cut is not only cruelty, it is a way to stamp possession when he cannot assume the paternal role by marrying her or protecting her. In fantasy terms, he seals her sexuality and inscribes himself as the one who names and marks. It manages fear of the rival while keeping him fixed in the son's position. He neither wins the object nor accepts the law. He writes the conflict on her skin.
Upon taking a more critical look, we think this brings us now to what Paro might have meant for Devdas in his childhood. She is his playmate, and she is just as forgiving of Devdas' sense of entitlement. He slaps her at one point because she adores him. I imagine this adoration must have meant the world for Devdas, given freely like only a child can. There is perhaps an ambivalence here for Devdas, to be nourished so freely by someone so younger than himself. She seems to have a better sense of consequences and attempts to make Devdas understand them. When he lashes out, she gets upset, and this is perhaps the only time we see Devdas attempting, even if somewhat insincerely, to repair a relationship. It feels as though she was able to explain to Devdas with greater patience why he must not behave a certain way. For Devdas, it was Paro that could have potentially mediated his grandiosity, helping him with a more realistic sense of self-esteem based on his capacities.
The father's law does not vanish when the father dies. It migrates into social law, caste, prestige, property, and the voice of reputation. We see this even before the father's death. Paro's grandmother visits Devdas' mother to suggest a match. The meeting is friendly on the surface, yet the proposal is dismissed on grounds of status and rank. The refusal is not argued as a private choice. It is framed as what the family and the world expect. Devdas learns that desire must answer to reputation. When Paro's marriage is arranged, the same law appears in many voices. The elders speak of honor. The wedding procession and the songs of departure underline that Paro now belongs elsewhere. Devdas accepts this as the natural order. He tells himself this is the only possible path. In Oedipal terms, this is not resolution. It is capitulation that breeds resentment. The superego he builds is not the quiet inner guide of a settled identification. It is the loud judge who says no and then punishes.
After the father dies, the social voice becomes more explicit. Devdas and his brother argue over funeral rites, arms, and the estate. The conversation is about sums of money, but what is really at stake is who speaks for the house and who sets its public face. Devdas submits, then resents. He returns to Kolkata and spends, but the spending does not free him. It is a protest within the same frame of prestige and display. This is the context for the hard inner judge that takes shape. You can hear its verdict in his exhausted claim on the train, like, "I do not like anything. Now what I like is that I do not like anything." He speaks not as an agent, but as a sentenced man. The final image at Paro's gate shows social law at work one last time. Devdas arrives and calls her name. She runs to help. The household orders the gate shut. The command is about propriety and rank. Devdas dies outside the threshold. His last scene is arranged within the rules of honor and witness that have governed him since childhood.
Alcohol becomes the compromise that fits this structure. It satisfies an oral longing for comfort, dulls the fear of the judge, and also permits punishment. The kota scenes already establish the pattern. Devdas pays, refuses to take pleasure, declares contempt, and then returns. The public space gives him witnesses and a script. He can confess, be shamed, and feel relief. After his father's death, he states the motive plainly. He drinks to be able to breathe. He does not seek intoxication alone. He seeks a way to regulate unbearable feeling. Outside the kota, the same logic repeats. He spends nights in parks, wanders, and looks for settings where collapse will be seen. The journey scenes show the same loop. On a train, he meets Chunilal. Chunilal leaves a bottle behind. Devdas drinks again. Fever rises. He coughs blood. Dharmadas's servant asks to get off at a big station and see a doctor. Devdas refuses and wants to keep moving. Movement matters more to him than care, because stillness would invite mourning. He speaks of leaving the world rather than healing. Alcohol gives him a way to return to an early register of comfort that centers feeding and holding. In Oedipal time, the child knows love through feeding and holding. The bottle replaces the breast. It also lets the superego deliver its sentence through hangovers, disgrace, and public falls, thus repeating the blow and shame of the father.
Paro later makes the mother's substitute offer completely clear. She asks him to come to her house because there is no one there to take care of him. She says it is her life's ambition to look after him. Social law blocks this, and his inner structure cannot use it. Accepting Paro as caregiver inside her husband's household would violate the same norms that have ruled him. Accepting Chandramukhi as partner would require binding care and desire in one person. He cannot do either. He stays with the bottle, the scene, and the path that ends at the closed gate. The point is not pleasure, it is the scene. He replaces himself where the inner father can condemn him and where a mother can pick him up. Does this mean that the Oedipus complex was ever resolved for him? Nope. A resolution would show itself in a capacity to choose to bear loss without needing to be punished, to bind love and sexuality for the same person, to the same person, and to take up the paternal position for oneself rather than simply fear it in others. Devdas does none of this. When Paro asks him to promise he will stop drinking, he asks her to promise she will stop remembering him. He cannot release the mother-like bond with Paro and cannot consent to the adult bond with Chandramukhi. He cannot step into a father's stance of protection or generativity. He gives money, buys ornaments, talks of marriage in the abstract, and then runs from any act that would change the map of his ties.
The consequences for his personality are exactly what Freud might have predicted: a weak ego under a harsh judge, an ideal of purity tied to childhood, and a contempt for bodily love that he disavows and seeks at the same time, a worldview in which law is external and implacable, and desire is criminal by definition, a taste for thresholds rather than rooms. He is always at a door, a courtyard, a gate. The first padlocked door with the father's edict becomes the final gate that closes as he dies outside Paro's house. The image is not accidental. He dies in the son's place. at the mother's threshold, punished by the father's law that now speaks through household honor. He chooses a death that is meant to be seen. It is the boy's last appeal to both parents at once. Even his rivalry shifts from father to elder brother after the father's death. He quarrels about money, storms off, and spends as if to wound the house. This is a common displacement when the original Oedipal rival is gone. The point is not wealth, it is the contest for authority and love inside the family script that has never been rewritten. This repetition signals the absence of a setting where the conflict could have been worked through.
If you want to name the thread in one sentence, Devdas never moves from son to man. He clings to the mother through Paro, seeks the mother again in Chandramukhi, fears the father as law rather than becoming the father in the symbolic sense, and lets the judge inside do the work that the father once did outside. He can imagine love, he can suffer for love, he can even inscribe love on a woman's face, but he cannot choose love in a way that would end the old triangle. The Oedipal stage remains open. It writes his personality, breaks his relationships, darkens his view of the world, and finally sets the terms of his death. This is how the Oedipus complex, understood in plain language as a map of growing up, helps us read Devdas. The film is not a romance about fate, it is a record of a man who never completes a basic task of development and who pays for it with his life.
If we can move away from the story of Devdas here to take a more cultural lens, Sudhir Kakkar writes about how if there is a disease in the mother-infant relationship in India, it comes not so much from maternal reprimand or punishment, but from the inversion of emotional roles, particularly in the case of the male child. Now, what is this inversion? Kakkar explains that an Indian mother experiences her newborn infant, especially a son, as a kind of a savior and nurtures him with gratitude and reverence as much as affection and care. At least at the time when Devdas was written, when a daughter was born, she was thought to be a guest in the family who would leave the house and ultimately start her own. But having a son cemented the mother's position in the family and rooted the mother. As such, it is as though that the mother unconsciously recruits her son to be the receptacle of her desires and wishes that he fulfills them. I'm directly quoting Kakkar here. The son feels compelled then to act as a savior. Faced with her unconscious intimations and demands, he may feel confused, helpless, and inadequate, frightened by his mother's overwhelming nearness, and yet unable and partly unwilling to get away. This is the reason why, for Kakkar, the Oedipus complex is inverted in the Indian context. It is the son that possesses the mother, and it is the father who feels left out of the dyad. The intensity of the mother-son bond is simply unparalleled in the Indian context. But this also makes the son feel inadequate, for he knows that he cannot be responsible for an adult woman's sexuality, let alone his mother's. Elsewhere, Kakkar also writes about how Skanda and Ganesha personify the two opposing wishes of the older child on the eve of the Oedipus complex. A powerful push for independence and an equally strong pull towards surrender to the maternal form from which he has just emerged. You must be aware of how the goddess Parvati promised mangoes for the first person that went around the world. Skanda set about traveling, but Ganesha simply circled his mom, for she was his world. And well, it was him that got those mangoes. Thus, in Hindu culture, Ganesha's surrender is considered to be superior to Skanda's wish for independence. We wanted to bring this up because, along with a fragile sense of self owing to maternal indulgence, it is possible that Devdas also experiences a self that is confused, with a sense of inadequacy that comes from having to be his mother's savior, not very sure if he must circle the world or circle the mother.
Sudhir Kakkar's Indian and Hindu lens foregrounds an inner world shaped by prolonged maternal symbiosis, primary processes thinking, and a cultural valuation of receptivity and inwardness. He describes early Indian child rearing as long on soothing fusion and light on created separation. In that ecology, the mind grows with strong primary process habits such as sensory, imagistic, and relational thinking, and a weaker later secondary process grips such as planning, reality testing, and decisive agency. This map fits Devdas closely. His romance with Paro is pastoral, musical, and dreamy. He thrives in scenes of memory and song and wilts when asked to act against the family order. When modern life compresses choice into the present and demands a decision such as defy parents and marry now, he freezes and then regresses to alcohol and drift. Kakkar also shows how Indian religiosity honors a maternal feminine stance in men through the bhakti posture of receptive devotion. Devdas repeatedly seeks being held more than being agentic. He wants Paro's feet as a place to rest, and he wants Chandramukhi's home as a place to be nursed. In that sense, his love slides from eros to bhakti, from adult partnership to a culturally legible longing for maternal containment. The result is a familiar split. He can accept care without sex from Chandramukhi, and he can idealize erotic union with Paro without withstanding frustration. He cannot pull the two into one whole woman. Kakkar's emphasis on the coexistence of good and bad mother images also clarifies the pattern. Paro begins as the good mother, space of comfort and belonging. When she becomes unavailable, she acquires the traits of the bad or persecutory object in fantasy and is marked by him. Chandramukhi, first made to carry the bad and shameful projection, is later allowed to become the good container when she turns ascetic and purely caring. He never integrates these two images into a single complex person. And mature love, which needs both caring and erotic courage, cannot form. Kakkar finally notes a culturally recognizable tendency under stress towards self-castration and passivity, a wish to surrender agency, identity with the tormentor, and dissolve into fate. Devdas's arc of renunciation of action and clinging to drink, wandering, and finally the chosen collapse at Paro's gate feels like precisely that, a sacrificial self-erasure that makes symbolic sense in his inner world even as it destroys him in the outer one.
We will now attempt to explain Devdas's failure to mourn Paro's loss, his quick descent into alcoholism and self-destruction. In his essay Mourning and Melancholia, Freud distinguished between two ways of responding to a loss. In mourning, one is able to gradually let go of one's attachment to a person, knowing that they can be found internally. The lost person's presence is available to them in a more internal way. Therefore, they can comprehend their loss and move on. As opposed to this, in Melancholia, one is unable to find the person within themselves. This is the case when what the lost person meant to them or what they meant to that person is somewhat more ambivalent. Freud writes, one cannot clearly see what it is that has been lost, and it is all the more reasonable to suppose the patient cannot consciously perceive what he has lost either. This indeed might be so, even if the patient is aware of the loss which has given rise to the melancholia. but only in the sense that he knows whom he has lost, but not what he has lost in him. The way we see it, Devdas was unaware that he hoped to make up for some of his developmental deficits in his relationship with Paro. That is what he lost when he lost her. A chance at understanding his childhood, what he meant for her then, and what he could have become with her continued presence. It feels like all of this was lost on him, that he could have grown into a man that could have had Paro's love, and that he would have been a different person for it. Perhaps he even feels guilt for how he had treated her in childhood, and all of this complicates his grief.
Now, Freud also wrote about how pleasurable self-destruction can feel at times and offered an explanation for it. The ambivalent feelings towards a lost object carries with it at least some hatred for them and a desire to hurt them for their abandonment. And being left with no one else, a person turns against himself, the masochistic pleasure, a stand-in for the sadistic pleasure one might have gotten from hurting the other. We are saying this because we thought Devdas' attempts at repair after he lashed out at Paro in their childhood were insincere, his omnipotence still dominating in the picture. But as the adult Devdas descends into alcoholism, he is able to hate and love Paro in a way that is deeper, even as it is painful. His hatred for Paro is no longer the superficial quarrels of childhood. It has now gained depth with her abandonment of him for another man. Now, this could have been useful if Devdas were able to work through them, but unfortunately, that was not the case. It is somewhat surprising that Devdas was unable to find Paro internally within himself. In Melancholia, one is more conflicted, angry, or guilty about the lost person and is therefore unable to find the person inside of themselves, being able to internalize their presence. One would think her presence during his childhood would have been enough, but perhaps the original loss was in being sent away and not being sure if one could still be remembered, if one would still be remembered. What do you guys think? Leave a comment below. The work of mourning is also more than being able to locate the lost object internally. It also involves being able to find a sense of oneself in the absence of the lost object. Perhaps it is this that explains why Devdas' grief is so complicated. Without Paro, he is simply unable to see himself as a lovable person. Growing up, Paro's love and patient understanding was Devdas' only buffer against his punitive father. Her presence acted as a barrier against an otherwise hostile environment. To give this up would mean that Devdas would have to open himself up to his father's attacks, which he is unable to do. He was punished in a way that Devdas could not see himself as a capable person who could stand up to him. Paro's love was a barrier against this helplessness, and he cannot give that up and open himself up to a punitive father or world. This is perhaps one more reason why Devdas cannot give Paro up.
We will now attempt to explain Devdas' clinging to Paro as an idealized good object from a Kleinian lens. Now, Melanie Klein was a psychoanalyst who also worked with children. Her writings focus on the early mental life of an infant and how that might explain unconscious dynamics. In the earliest stages of life, an infant's mind lacks both the capacity for thought and the ability to use language. Now, this is absolutely frightening because all that the infant is left with are raw bodily sensations, random experiences of pain and pleasure with no way to tell what is causing what. Imagine being on a roller coaster and having to experience all that it causes in the body without being able to know or realize you are on that roller coaster. How would you describe that? Chaos would be an understatement. Without language and a way to make sense of what is happening, the infant is absolutely terrorized. But there is one thing that the infant can clearly tell, even without thought or language. That would be the mother's presence or absence. For this reason, when the mother is there to soothe the infant, this experience is cherished and the person is looked up to as an all-powerful savior. The mother's absence, however, is felt as absolutely horrifying. It is worth repeating at this point that the infant has very little understanding of what causes what, and the only thing she knows is that her good mother is a savior who can do her no harm whatsoever. For this reason, Klein thought that the mother's absence is experienced by the infant as though there is something absolutely evil out there. The mother's absence is therefore experienced as an evil presence. Thus, when frustrations arise, the infant feels persecuted by something evil out there. This persecutory anxiety makes the infant cling desperately to the good object, the mother or caregiver, who is imagined as all-powerful and protective. The persecutory anxieties are therefore overcome by desperately clinging to the mother and by refusing to let her go. As such, the infant's internal world is split into good and bad objects. The word objects here denote the experiences of the infant. The good experiences come from the idealized all-good mother that satisfies and soothes. The bad object is the imagined evil presence that persecutes and threatens to annihilate, to take the mother away from the infant. Crazy as it might seem, this splitting is crucial because in the earliest months of life, the baby's fragile mind cannot tolerate too much fear or frustration. By turning the mother into an all-good, powerful figure, the infant creates a sense of safety and stability in an otherwise chaotic world. Without this early phase of idealization, the infant would be left unprotected against raw anxiety and helplessness.
Klein also emphasized that when the loss of a loved person cannot be mourned, it is usually because an earlier sense of loss in any of these positions in childhood is still unresolved. We will speculate a bit here on how that might be so with Devdas. We have already talked about how a doting mother is incapable of allowing the child to understand realistic limits. Klein wrote all of this from the child's perspective, but this can be a profoundly difficult exercise for the mother. She has to allow herself to be devalued from the idealized, all-powerful mother of early infancy. It will be our argument that a doting mother is likely to be highly defended against this devaluation. She fears frustrating the child precisely because she does not want to face the humiliation that would come with the child realizing that she is not as powerful as the child had imagined. As such, a doting mother would not allow a child to mourn the loss of the idealized all-good mother. With Devdas, we see how the actual loss of Paro allows him to hold on to a vision of her as an idealized object. We speculate that he never mourned the loss of his mother as an all-good, idealized object, and losing Paro sets him up for this repetition. Perhaps his father, being as harsh as he was, also contributed to the split in his internal world remaining unresolved. Once Paro becomes unattainable, Devdas can cradle an ideal image of her without the friction of a daily life. This is a melancholic arrangement where the conscious talk is about the lost beloved, but the real loss is in the ego. He clings not to Paro as a whole person, but to a soothing inner picture that protects him from the shocks of an indifferent world. The staircase encounter after his father's death is a useful anchor here. He speaks to Paro with formal politeness, yet the scene shows an inward turn where his drama eclipses here, which is exactly how Melancholia narrows the field of concern. We also want to recognize here that Paro's repeated supplication helps uphold Devdas's fantasy. In contrast with later versions such as Devdi, where Paro affirms her marriage and sets limits, unable to let go of the fantasy, he attends to his own drama than to Paro, which also fits Freud's description of melancholia. In Mourning, it is the world which has become poor and empty. In Melancholia, it is the ego itself.
Chandramukhi becomes the screen on which Devdas's inner split plays out, and her arc clarifies why he can receive care but cannot bind desire and care in one person. Their first contact is in the kota where she performs before a room of men. Devdas sits wounded and contemptuous. He raises the question of money, throws cash, and leaves without taking anything. To her, this is unusual. He gives but refuses to consume. She says he is the first man to give money without any motive and asks to see him again. Read more closely, the thrown cash is not only an insult, it looks like Devdas evacuating raw, unbearable feeling into Chandramukhi and testing whether she can hold it for him. When Devdas returns later, weakened by grief and drink, she sees the person behind the performance. She begins to distinguish the man from the scene and senses that the scene serves his self-punishment. That is exactly what the container-contained model and the alpha function are about. One mind holds another's unthinkable material long enough to turn it into something that can be felt and thought. Beyond says a good container receives projections in a kind of receptive dreaming state that he called maternal reverie, then metabolizes them so they can be reintrojected in a digestible form. Chandramukhi's arc maps onto this with unusual clarity. She first absorbs the insult without retaliating. Her choice is decisive. She leaves the kota, sells her ornaments, empties the performance hall, and rents a modest house. One night, she finds him in the street, brings him home, lays him down, calls a doctor, and nurses him for days. The doctor credits her care with keeping him alive. She hates alcohol, and yet when he drinks, she weeps, not from moral outrage, but from love that cannot change his pattern. At home, the rhythm is steady. Meals, cool clothes, quiet watching, and gentle warning when his hand moves towards the bottle. When he improves, she restrains his impulses. When he despairs, she stays. She becomes a caring adult who offers shelter, food, nursing, and devotion. That looks like reverie and alpha function made visible. She takes in his formless dread and shame and gives back steadier states that he can use for a while. When the doctor advises a period of rest away from the city, she asks to go with him so she can keep cooking and caring and watching over him. He refuses. He fears social insult and he cannot allow the caregiver to become the partner. She gives him a scarf, asks him to stop drinking, and says he should call her if his body fails. Even in their final moments, she pleads with him again to stop drinking. Her practical devotion meets his own repetition of the loop of drinking, shame, collapse, and rescue. She offers the only workable future he has. He accepts the care, but he does not accept the bond. This is a pre-Oedipus solution in adult clothes. He can feed at a mother's table, but cannot desire the same woman as a lover and a partner. For a while, this containment works. But Devdas has not built an inner container of his own. He needs Chandramukhi to stay only mother and never lover. When he relapses on the train, it is an attack on the very links that would have helped him think his pain. He could not accept the containment. He still cannot join care and desire in the same person.
Containment also helps explain why her nursing works only up to a point. Containment also has limits. Beyond said, containment fails when the person attacks linking. An attack on linking is a wish to smash the very connections that would help us make sense of our pain. The film shows this clearly. After a good spell, he meets Chimney Babu on the train, takes the bottle, coughs blood, and refuses help. He attacks the link between care and understanding. There is also the load on the container. If one person is forced to carry too much for too long, she gets exhausted. Chandramukhi keeps hearing and bearing, but Devdas does not grow an inner container of his own. He then turns to alcohol as a kind of false container. The bottle dulls the feeling rather than turning it into thought. It also shows the burden on the container. Another Kleinian idea helps us name the next part: projective identification. Projective identification means you push a feeling into someone else and then treat them as if they now carry it. It is a bit different from simple projection. In projection, you imagine that someone else has your unwanted feelings, but you still keep a kind of distance from them. In projective identification, however, you actually push those feelings into the other person through behavior or emotion, and then you interact with them as if they now truly hold that feeling for you. It is not just fantasy, but it is something lived out between two people. Early on, Devdas stuffs contempt, guilt, and fear into Chandramukhi. He then sees her as impure and hates her for it. Later, after she gives up the kotha and becomes all care, he flips and treats her like a pure mother. This flip is devaluation and then idealization respectively. It means he has not yet reached the depressive position. The depressive position is the more grown-up state where you can love and hate the same person, feel sorry when you hurt them, and still stay in the relationship. Devdas is not there. He keeps the split. Paro holds pure love, Chandramukhi holds shame and sex, then later pure care. She is not a fixed bad object. She is a receptive object who is made to carry whatever part of him he cannot bear at that moment.
If we stay with the details, the film even gives us a small transitional object, the scarf she ties for him. He keeps it as if it might hold her steadying presence when she's not there. But an object that should bridge one state to another becomes a charm against thought. He clings to the sign of care while refusing the risk of recognizing her desire. That is why her renunciation soothes him. He wants her purified into a mother, not met as a partner who can want and be wanted. There is a further cost to this arrangement. Hatred becomes the safest link. It is hard to say if Devdas loved Chandramukhi, but it is remarkable how freely he hates her. Beyond once said that hate can sometimes be a way to keep contact when love feels too dangerous. Devdas can rage at Chandramukhi without having to face her as a full person who might also want, refuse, or ask. In a depressive position, hatred would be followed by concern and repair. Here, it is followed by flight, by sleep, or by drink. The link holds, but it does not heal.
Finally, the social world keeps the split in place. The stigma of the kotha makes it easier for Devdas to deny her as a partner, even after she leaves that life. Reputation gives him language to refuse what his psyche already fears. He can say he is protecting her from insult. In truth, he is protecting himself from integration. This is why the rhythm returns to the same loop. She contains, he uses, he relapses, she pleads, he moves on. The framework of containment is real and beautiful, but without his own movement into the depressive position, it cannot become a shared life. In conclusion, Chandramukhi is an oscillating part object and a maternal container who carries whatever Devdas cannot yet bear to fill. First, his shame and desire, later, his weakness and need, until he can take those parts back, feel them, and still recognize her as a whole person. Their bond will remain a scene of care without a future.
Indian mythology gives us some of the earliest blueprints of what it meant to be a man in the subcontinent. Two figures stand out as opposites. Krishna is remembered as the eternal lover. His strength lies not in brute force, but in a paradoxical mix of abundance and restraint. He dances with many gopis. He attracts love wherever he goes, but his power lies in self-mastery. Desire is abundant around him, yet he does not lose himself in it. Shiva represents the other pole. He is the ascetic who can remain in perfect stillness and withdraw into meditation. Yet when provoked, often when his beloved is harmed, he unleashes terrifying strength and destruction. Between these poles is an older ideal that India carried for centuries. Ardhanarishvara, the fused form of Shiva and Parvati, half man and half woman, an image of balance between masculine and feminine. Before colonialism reshaped ideas of manhood, Bengal carried a more fluid sense of masculinity. In Vaishnav devotion, men were encouraged to take on the feelings of Radha, which meant openness, longing, and surrender in love. This was not humiliation, but the highest way to access the divine. Not weakness, but spiritual strength. Taken together, these examples show that the complete man was not imagined only as hard or violent. He was a composite figure. He was expected to be tender and strong, disciplined and desiring, capable of leading and capable of yielding. Colonial power disrupted this balance by creating the stereotype of the effeminate Bengali Babu. The British compared the Bengali clerk to the manly Englishman and declared him weak, overly talkative, and sexually uncontrolled. This became a political weapon. If the Bengali man was weak and effeminate, then he was unfit for self-rule. Laws and policies reinforced this view. The Age of Consent Act of 1891 raised the legal age of sex with a wife from 10 to 12. While the change protected young brides, it had another impact. It humiliated the Bengali husband by implying he was predatory and as someone that could not be trusted. It also suggested that their masculinity was dishonorable. At the same time, colonial censorship cut away depictions of romance and sexuality from cinema, arguing that Indian men were too volatile and excitable to see such images. All of this narrowed the acceptable image of masculinity. Chastity and self-control became the only safe ways for a Bengali man to show dignity. Gandhian nationalism reinforced this by turning restraint into moral superiority. The result was a new masculine script. Manhood was proved by renouncing, by holding back, by showing self-discipline in the body, even when the world was unstable. Devdas is definitely a product of this script.
It is within this framework that Devdas emerges. Set Devdas against his background and his figure becomes clearer. He inherits a cultural memory that once allowed men to embrace balance and tenderness. His character shows a man caught between inherited softness and colonial pressure to prove self-control. He does not fight colonial power or feudal rules directly. Instead, his struggle is displaced into the personal realm of love and sexuality. As Fanon argued in The Wretched of the Earth, colonial subjects often resist within the limits that the colonizer allows. Hegel's idea of the master and slave is also useful here. The colonized seeks recognition from the master but never receives it, so he looks elsewhere for signs of worth. For Devdas, that place is chastity. He refuses to consummate relationships, refuses to accept Paro or Chandramukhi fully, and instead turns abstinence into a badge of dignity. What looks like indecision is also the only way he can protest the colonial image of him as weak and oversexed. When adulthood demands choice, he cannot bring law, care, and desire together within himself. Instead, the film stages a substitute act that carries the weight of sexuality while avoiding its consequences. The scene where Devdas scars Paro's forehead captures this. On the river bank, which is a woman's space for drawing water, Devdas calls Paro proud and flawless like the full moon. He then marks her perfection by striking her forehead with a stick. The image reinforces the sexual undercurrent. The stick functions as a phallic sign. The water pot tips and spills as she falls. Afterwards, he ties a bandage with tenderness. He cannot take her as a partner within the law, so he leaves his mark as a substitute form of possession. Jessica Benjamin's concept of sadomasochism also helps us to make sense of his actions with Paro. When people cannot recognize each other as equal subjects, they often fall into patterns of domination and submission. At the gate, he submits and society plays the role of father to complete the ritual. Death for him and confinement for her are the only outcomes. He never reaches the integration that adult life requires, where care, law, and desire are bound together within the self. Later, the film cuts between Devdas coughing blood and Paro's scar bleeding again. Their bond is written in blood rather than consummated in sex. This is what Poonam Arora calls ritual violence. It is not adult choice. It is an act of control that masks fear of loss. It provides a way to inscribe possession without breaking codes of purity.
Caste and class add another layer. Devdas' family refuses Paro on grounds of rank. Paro's eventual marriage into a wealthy household shows how women's bodies were bound to family honor. When Devdas strikes Paro, his action is not only personal but also shaped by this system. Women's purity is treated as a symbol of male status. The final gate scene shows this logic in its purest form. As Devdas dies outside, Paro rushes to him but is locked inside by her in-laws. Here, the father's law has become society's law. Honor, propriety, and class boundaries outweigh compassion. Devdas dies at the threshold, never having stepped into the adult position of making choices or building a life. He remains the son at the door. This raises the question of whether Devdas is a hero at all. If we use the usual definition of a popular hero in cinema, Devdas does not qualify. A hero fights villains, saves his beloved, and wins love at the end. Devdas does none of these. He's indecisive, self-destructive, and narcissistic. Yet he gripped audiences for over a century. As Sharma argues, in the colonial setting, he can also be read as a kind of a hero. By clinging to chastity, he resists the colonial stereotype of the oversexed Babu. His refusal to take Paro or Chandramukhi become a badge of moral strength. His determination to keep his promise and die at Paro's gate gave his life a certain sense of dignity. His aggression did not strike against colonial power directly, but appeared in sadomasochistic form. In this way, political struggle was displaced into psychosexual drama. Devdas becomes a hero not by conquering the world, but by embodying an ethic of restraint that gave dignity to men who felt small under colonial and feudal structures.
Chandramukhi's role makes this even clearer. She begins as a performer in the public marketplace of desire. Devdas throws money and refuses pleasure, staging chastity against corruption. Later, when grief and alcohol break him, she makes the move Paro cannot. She sells her ornaments, leaves the kotha, sets up a modest home, and takes care of him like a nurse. He accepts her care but refuses to accept her as a partner. In his inner map, Paro has become the ideal of childhood purity, while Chandramukhi has become the nurturing mother. Care and desire cannot exist in one woman. Once again, chastity becomes a site where he performs masculinity. He shows that he is not the lustful weakling the colonizers described, but at the same time, he avoids the adult task of making a real choice. Aurora's reading shows the cost of this structure. The ritual that replaces sex is still a blow to the woman's face. Paro carries the scar through a life of confinement. Chandramukhi spends her resources and strength on him without receiving commitment. The gate that closes is not fate, but social law, repeating the father's voice. His purity rests on the pain of others. His manhood is sustained by women's labor and by spectacle. Later retellings like Anurag Kashyap's Devdi highlight how things change when women no longer accept these roles. In that film, Paro and Chanda emerge as subjects rather than objects. Paro returns as a married woman and refuses Dev. She praises her husband's sexual prowess and tells Dev calmly that she is showing him his worth. She asserts her independence, shames Dev for his immaturity, and denies him the right to her body. In that moment, she becomes a subject rather than an object. She denies him the power to make her his mirror. Chanda too moves from a figure of fantasy to a person with her own agency. She becomes a speaking subject with her own choices. Sartre's point that subjectivity often depends on objectifying the other is reversed. Here, women gain subjecthood by objectifying Dev, treating him as an immature person who is unworthy. This is the opposite of Bimal Roy's Devdas, where women carry his wounds and redeem him. The modern story shows that once women stop being objects, the old ritual of male marking no longer works. Dev's path shifts from self-annihilation towards self-expansion only when he begins to see them as subjects.
If we return to the gods, the contrast is sharp. Krishna's masculinity is defined by disciplined joy. Shiva's is defined by power that is used to defend love, not to destroy aimlessly. Ardhanarishvara represents balance, the union of masculine and feminine traits. Devdas tries to stand at this crossroads but fails. He retains tenderness but lacks strength. He replaces integration with ritual. Taken together, Devdas' archetype of masculinity is not simply personal weakness. It is a product of colonial stereotyping, feudal hierarchies, and nationalist ethics of chastity. He embodies the anxiety of a society stripped of its older, more fluid sense of manhood and forced into a narrow ideal of self-control. He resists the insult of effeminacy, but does so by turning his protest inward and onto women's bodies. The forehead scar and the final gate are not just dramatic symbols, but reminders of how gender politics under colonialism made chastity, suffering, and ritual violence the stage on which masculinity could be expressed. Devdas is remembered because he captured this knot of history, culture, and psychology. He is moving because he holds on to dignity within tight limits, but he is troubling because he makes women carry the burden of his protest. Colonial humiliation pushes him towards purity. Feudal law keeps him a son. Devotional memory allows him to feel holy even when he harms. The scar, the bottle, and the gate are all signs of this failure. What is worth rescuing from him is the insight from the older tradition that a complete man can hold tenderness and agency together. The task his story leaves for later generations is to build a masculinity that can choose openly, bind care and desire in one relationship, take law as an inner guide, and allow women to be subjects rather than sacrifices. Only then can the archetype of Devdas stop ruling the cultural imagination. The film keeps staging Devdas as an object of reverence and expectation. His mother treats him like a chosen son. Paro and Chandramukhi approach him in forms of devotional posture, often literally at his feet, and the mise-en-scène frames him as the center around which other lives should revolve. In a culture where touching feet signals reverence and where devotional love often imagines surrender before a beloved, the film translates that grammar into romance. Paro's childhood intimacy and Chandramukhi's nursing both carry a promise that he can restore order. They load him with fantasies of rescue and repair. He is invited to be the one who can reconcile the quarrel between desire and duty, love and honor, purity and stigma. His flight into alcoholism can be read as a refusal of that assignment. It is not only self-harm, it is also a statement that he will not perform the masculine ideal of the savior lover. He will not conquer the social order. He will not even conquer himself. In psychoanalytic terms, he steps out of the phallic script that demands potency, mastery, and decisive action. He chooses passivity, dissolution, and drift. That choice, however tragic, does something profound to the charge placed upon him by others. It breaks the spell of omnipotence that Paro, Chandramukhi, and the mother cast onto him. He topples himself from the pedestal they have built, and with the collapse, he releases them and the audience from the pressure that the ideal had created.
There is a gendered relief as well. Indian popular cinema has repeatedly sold the fantasy of the man who will fight, rescue, marry, and restore. In such stories, the woman's surrender is redeemed by his mastery. Devdas withdraws that contract. His renunciation is costly, yet it clears a space where women's actions count on their own terms. Chandramukhi's care work is not a temporary bridge to marriage. It is the very texture of the relationship. Paro's domestic stewardship is not a consolation prize. It is a life she chooses and sustains. The audience is released from the demand to admire domination. We can instead value endurance, listening, and the simple fact of staying present with another suffering. This is why so many viewers feel an odd sense of relief in a film that is otherwise soaked in sorrow. The relief does not come from the plot, which is relentless, but comes from the lifting of an expectation. The man will not fix it. The fantasy of all-powerful lover is withdrawn. Once that explanation is gone, other experiences are permitted. We can mourn without planning solutions. We can sit with tenderness and care rather than conquest. Chandramukhi becomes legible not as a woman waiting to be saved, but as someone who saves in the register of care. Paro becomes legible not as a prize to be won, but as a woman who builds a life where she is. The emotional center of the film shifts from heroics to holding, from action to presence.
However, it is important to state that empathy for Devdas's early wounds does not cancel his responsibility as an adult. He harms others and must be answerable for it. He cuts Paro's forehead and turns his panic into her permanent mark. He drinks knowing that it leads to cruelty, public scenes and neglect, and he refuses repeated offers of help from Chandramukhi and Dharamdas. He accepts Chandramukhi's care but withholds commitment, using her devotion without building a shared life. He writes a denial letter to Paro rather than speak honestly or act decisively, then punishes himself in ways that also punish those who love him. He wastes family wealth in binges, adds to his mother's grief, and escalates conflict with his brother instead of choosing work and steadiness. None of this was forced on him. He had other options. He could have sought treatment and kept boundaries with alcohol. He could have apologized for the scar and repaired trust. He could have either chosen Paro with courage or released her cleanly without marking her body or haunting her gate. He could have accepted Chandramukhi as a partner and given her dignity in return for her care. Accountability means naming these missed choices and their costs. It also means seeing that growth would have required actions he repeatedly refused to take.
If there is a lesson to carry forward, it is this: love needs agency as well as tenderness. Care and desire belong in the same relationship. Loss should grow inside as conscience rather than press from outside as threat. Women must be subjects of their own lives, not the scenery of a man's suffering. Devdas fails to reach that ground. We do not have to. Perhaps that is why we keep returning to this tale. It helps us name what breaks, and it nudges us towards the kind of adult choices that might heal it. In Bimal Roy's Devdas, the central pattern is simple and persistent. Devdas does not connect his actions to their consequences, and when consequences arrive, he is unable or unwilling to accept them. He experiences events as if they simply happened to him. The film shows this pattern from childhood into adulthood. He runs from school, throws stones, and hides in the neighbor's garden. And when his father locks him in and orders no food for him either, Devdas behaves as if he is unjustly treated rather than responsible. He writes a letter to Paro denying love, hands it to a servant to post, then immediately wants to recall it. And when the servant says it is already sent, he sinks into self-pity. He strikes Paro's forehead and later grieves as if fate, not his own act, created the outcome. After Paro's marriage, he drinks, wanders, and narrates himself as a victim of destiny. What might explain this pattern of behavior? In psychoanalysis, much of adult behavior is traced back to early relationships, particularly with caregivers. Object relations theory argues that the way a child experiences closeness, frustration, and separation with parents shapes how they later deal with responsibility, love, guilt, and loss. If a child is indulged and protected excessively, he may grow up without fully internalizing the idea that actions have limits or consequences. Instead, he may expect others to absorb the fallout of his behavior just as his parents once did.
In both the novel and the film, Devdas is portrayed as someone raised in a household where his whims were tolerated and boundaries were either inconsistent or imposed harshly. When as a boy he injures his teacher and class monitor, his father punishes him. Rather than seeing this as a moment to learn accountability, Devdas runs away and hides in the neighbor's garden, sulking as though he is the victim of injustice. This shows a split in his psychic world. On the one hand, he believes he should be indulged. On the other, he experiences even mild punishment as unbearable humiliation. Psychoanalytically, this reflects what Freud would describe as a fragile ego that has not developed the capacity to mediate between desire and external reality. This same pattern reappears in adulthood. When Paro is married off to another man, Devdas spends the rest of the film immersed in alcohol and self-pity, instead of taking responsibility for the role he played in rejecting her and for his inability to stand up to his family. He collapses into the position of the injured child who feels wronged by fate. His letter to Paro is another striking example. When he impulsively writes to deny his love, he imagines he has full control over the outcome. When he realizes the letter will cause Paro pain, he quickly regrets it, but again frames himself as the victim of circumstance when the servant tells him it has already been posted. The speed with which he swings from arrogance to self-pity is consistent with a personality that has never internalized limits and thus cannot process guilt in a constructive way.
From a Kleinian perspective, Devdas seems stuck between the paranoid schizoid position and the depressive position. In the paranoid schizoid state, people split the world into all good and all bad. externalizing blame when things go wrong. Devdas does this repeatedly, casting himself as good and unlucky and others as cruel and or unjust. The depressive position requires the ability to accept that one can hurt those one loves and still bear the responsibility without collapsing into despair. Devdas never achieves this, which is why he sulks and withdraws whenever confronted with consequences. His upbringing also plays a decisive role here. The indulgence of his mother, coupled with the authoritarian stance of his father, created a split template. One parent always gratified him, the other imposed rules without nurturing explanation. This left Devdas unable to integrate love and discipline into a balanced inner model. As a result, in adult life, he reacts to setbacks as either catastrophes or injustices, rather than as situations calling for maturity. His repeated self-victimization, his retreat into alcohol, and his failure to take responsibility for his choices all grow out of this unresolved psychic conflict. However, an object relations or even Kakar frame should not reduce the tragedy to mothering alone. Class, patriarchy, paternal violence, and feudal obedience are the outer bad objects that Devdas internalizes. The psyche and social are twined. His inner split mirrors a casteist moral order that made an adult, integrated love nearly impossible.
So was Devdas a tragic lover or the original Manchild? Short answer, perhaps more Manchild than tragic lover. And that is exactly why he feels tragic. He feels deeply, yet he will not grow into the work that love asks for. The world he lived in moved fast and left him little room to mature. Paro's marriage was arranged almost overnight, and Devdas had no time to process or act. He was financially and emotionally tied to his family, which made rebellion difficult, and years of separation turned his childhood love into a frozen ideal rather than a living bond. His helplessness feels human, and that is what draws our sympathy.
But he also clings to comfort, seeks to be nursed, and turns guilt into scenes instead of making amends. He marks Paro, turns to drink instead of dialogue, uses Chandramukhi, and lets dishonor speak for him when he should speak for himself. These choices are not only society's fault, they reveal a man who feels deeply but refuses to grow up.
So in the end, Devdas is both the lover and the man-child. He aches, he mourns, and he means well, but he cannot bring love and courage together. The film makes us pity him not just for his heartbreak, but for his failure to become the man that he could have been. The tension between feeling and growth, sorrow and self, makes Devdas timeless.